The year is 1878. The sun, a brutal, merciless eye in the cloudless sky, baked the Arizona territory. The air shimmered with heat, thick and dusty. Along a rutted dirt road, a small, weary procession moved toward the town of Redemption Creek. At its center, a man walked, his shoulders hunched not just from exhaustion, but from the heavy chains that bound his wrists and ankles. He was Apache, his face stoic, etched with a quiet, unyielding defiance. His name was Kana, a name that meant the one who stands firm. He had been captured during a skirmish, his spirit unbroken, his gaze fixed on a horizon no one else could see. Flanking him were 2 U.S. Army scouts, men with sun-weathered faces and distrustful eyes. They led the horses, their expressions a mixture of triumph and weary disdain. Ahead, the town of Redemption Creek was a low huddle of wooden buildings, a testament to man's brief, determined struggle against the vast, indifferent land. As they approached, the townspeople began to emerge, drawn by the sounds and the sight of the captured savage. Whispers followed the group, growing louder, turning into a low hum of animosity and curiosity. Kana kept his head down, but his senses were sharp. He felt the weight of their stares, the palpable hatred and fear. A small boy threw a rock that clattered harmlessly off his bound leg. A woman spat on the ground near his feet. His captors, Marshal Brody and a scout named Cooper, seemed to take a grim satisfaction in the spectacle. "Look at him, the wild animal," Brody muttered, his voice low and contemptuous, brought to heel like a dog. They reached the town square, a dusty clearing dominated by a weathered saloon and the general store. A small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of hard-edged curiosity and open hostility. The scouts dragged Kana toward the blacksmith's post, intending to chain him there for all to see. It was then that a voice cut through the noise, soft but with a core of steel. "Wait, stop." The crowd parted to reveal a woman. She was not young, perhaps in her late 30s, dressed in a simple dark calico dress. Her face was framed by hair the color of wheat, and her eyes, a clear, startling blue, were fixed on Kana. She was Ilara Vance, a widow who had been in Redemption Creek for 5 years, running a small homestead on the outskirts. Her husband, a kind but frail man, had died of a fever, leaving her to fend for herself. She was quiet, reserved, but known for her unwavering compassion. Brody scoffed. "Ilara, this is no business of yours. Get back inside." She ignored him, her gaze never leaving Kana's face. He met her eyes, and in that brief moment something passed between them, not pity, but a flicker of shared humanity. She saw the pain and the dignity beneath the dirt and the chains. He saw a light in her eyes he had not expected. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd, but loud enough for Brody and Kana to hear. "Don't hurt him. I'll buy him." An uneasy silence fell over the square. Brody laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Buy him? He's not a horsewoman. He's a hostile." "You were going to sell him for the reward, weren't you?" she countered, her voice gaining strength. "I'll pay. What do you want?" Brody's smirk wavered. The thought of a quick, easy profit was appealing, and the prospect of a quiet surrender was far better than the potential for an escape or a public execution that could rile the natives. He looked at Ilara, then at the man in chains. He saw a defeated savage and a foolish woman. An agreement, though, was a good deal. $500, he said, naming a ludicrously high number, fully expecting her to balk. Ilara's face paled, but her resolve didn't waver. "I'll bring it, tomorrow morning." The crowd buzzed, a mix of disbelief and indignation. Brody, sensing the mood, spat on the ground. "Fine, but if he causes any trouble, he's your responsibility, and I'll come for him myself." Kana watched her, his expression unreadable. He had faced death countless times, but this was a new, bewildering form of surrender. He did not know this woman, yet she had offered him a different kind of life, a life in chains, yes, but a life nonetheless. As she walked away, he wondered if he was being saved or simply transferred to a different cage. The next morning, Ilara returned with a leather satchel, her savings from years of meticulous work and frugality. The transaction was swift and businesslike. Brody and Cooper took the money and left Kanar's shackles, but gave her the key to the chains on his wrists. The shackles on his ankles were permanent. Ilara led him to her wagon. Kana, his spirit still unbroken, walked with a deliberate, even pace. She untied a rope and offered him a canteen of water. He took it, his eyes meeting hers. She saw a deep well of pain and mistrust, but also a quiet intelligence. He saw a kindness that was both foreign and unsettling. They left town in silence, the rumble of the wagon wheels on the dirt road the only sound. Ilara kept her gaze on the road, occasionally glancing at him. He was a presence, a fact of her life now, a fact that the town of Redemption Creek would not soon forget. As they neared her homestead, a small, well-kept cabin with a fenced-in garden, Kana's senses were on high alert. He was used to the vast, open spaces of his homeland, not the confinement of a small, man-made dwelling. She stopped the wagon and gestured to a small lean-to against the side of the cabin, an open-air shed. "You can stay here for now. It's not much, but it's out of the sun." She unlocked his wrist shackles, and for the first time in weeks, his hands were free. The relief was palpable. He rubbed his wrists, the skin chafed and raw. That evening, she brought him a bowl of stew and a piece of bread. He ate slowly, watching her as she went about her chores. She was methodical and efficient, her movements economical. She was a woman of the earth, he realized, her hands calloused from work, her face showing the lines of a hard life. "My name is Ilara," she said, her voice soft. "What is yours?" He hesitated, a deep-seated mistrust warring with an unnameable urge to connect. "Kana," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Kana," she repeated, the name sounding strange and beautiful on her tongue. The first few days were a tense dance of unspoken rules and wary observation. Kana kept to himself, his gaze always on the horizon, a prisoner of his circumstances. He helped with the chores she gave him, chopping wood, mending the fence, but he did so with a silent, detached efficiency. His ankle shackles were a constant, chafing reminder of his captivity. Ilara, for her part, gave him space, respecting his need for solitude. She brought him food and water, spoke a few words of instruction, and left him to his thoughts. She saw a deep-seated dignity in his every movement, even with the chains. One afternoon, a fierce dust storm swept through the valley. Ilara called to him to come inside, her voice urgent. He hesitated, his instinct to remain outside and face the storm. But the wind was a roaring force, a chaotic, blinding maelstrom. She took his arm, her touch brief and insistent, and pulled him inside the cabin. The small space was warm and smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Kana felt a strange sense of unease and comfort. He was unaccustomed to such intimacy, but the shelter was a relief. As the storm raged outside, they sat in silence, two strangers brought together by a cruel twist of fate, now sharing a small, fragile sanctuary. Weeks turned into a month. The initial tension between them began to soften, replaced by a quiet, unspoken understanding. Kana, with his keen senses and knowledge of the land, proved to be an invaluable help. He taught Ilara how to identify which wild plants were edible, how to find water sources that were not visible to the untrained eye, and how to track game. His skills were not just for survival, but for a deeper connection to the earth, a connection Ilara had lost. One evening, he was mending a broken latch on the chicken coop. Ilara watched him, fascinated by the quiet efficiency of his movements. The shackles on his ankles clanked softly with every step, a painful counterpoint to his grace. "You're very good with your hands," she said, her voice soft. He paused, a rare flicker of a smile on his face. "My father taught me. He was a great hunter, a great builder." "Tell me about him." Kana hesitated, then began to speak, his voice a low rumble. He spoke of his people, of the traditions, of the land that was their home. He spoke of his family, his father's wisdom, his mother's gentle hands. Ilara listened, captivated. She saw a world far different from her own, a world of deep spiritual connection to the earth, of a community bound by blood and tradition. She realized she had seen a symbol of a defeated people, but now she saw a man, a son, with a history and a culture as rich as her own. He, in turn, began to ask her about her life. She spoke of her husband, a gentle man who loved to read, and who had dreamed of a quiet life far from the bustling cities of the East. She spoke of her loneliness after his death, of the quiet strength she had to find to carry on. They began to share stories, their conversations bridges over the chasm of language and culture. Kana's English, which he had picked up from trading with settlers, became more fluid, and Ilara found herself learning a few words of his language. The town of Redemption Creek, however, had not forgotten about them. Gossip was a hungry beast, and the sight of an Apache man living on a white woman's land was a juicy morsel. The general store owner, a portly man named Mr. Thompson, made it a point to eye Ilara with suspicion whenever she came to town. The local preacher, a fire and brimstone man named Reverend Davies, preached a sermon about the dangers of consorting with heathens. One afternoon, as Kana was stacking firewood, a rider galloped up to the cabin. It was Cooper, one of the scouts who had brought him to town. Cooper's eyes were cold as he looked at Kana, a mix of contempt and jealousy. "Brody sent me to check up on things," he said, his voice flat. "Making sure he hasn't killed you yet, Ilara." Ilara stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "He's a good man, Cooper. He hasn't caused a lick of trouble." Cooper's gaze lingered on Kana, who met his stare with a silent, unwavering intensity. "He's a savage, Ilara. They don't change their stripes." He spat on the ground and then turned his horse, giving a final menacing look at Kana before he rode away. That night, as the stars came out, Ilara sat by the fire with Kana. She looked at his face, illuminated by the flickering flames. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "For what they say, for what they think." Kana shook his head. "They do not know, they do not see." "I see," she whispered, and she did. She saw the man, not the symbol. She saw the quiet strength, the deep sadness, the unyielding dignity. She reached out and very gently placed her hand over his. He did not pull away. The fire crackled, and in the quiet of the night their unspoken bond grew stronger. As autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, the harmony at the homestead was disrupted by the escalating hostility from the town. Ilara's reputation began to suffer. At the general store, Mr. Thompson refused to give her credit, forcing her to pay for everything in cash. Women who once smiled at her now turned their backs. The isolation she had felt as a widow was nothing compared to the deliberate, cruel ostracism she now endured. Kana was acutely aware of the change. He saw the cold stares when they went to town. He saw the way Ilara's shoulders would slump after an encounter. The guilt gnawed at him. He was a burden, a walking mark of shame. He considered running away, but the thought of leaving Ilara to face the town's scorn alone was unbearable. The chains on his ankles were a physical representation of his captivity, but the bonds of her kindness were far stronger. One late afternoon, Ilara returned from town, her face pale and drawn. She had a bruise on her arm. Kana, who was splitting wood, dropped the axe and went to her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. She held back tears, a rare show of emotion. It was nothing, just a misunderstanding. A group of men from town, they said things. Kanar's face hardened. He knew what they said. He knew what they thought. The protective rage he felt was a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. "I'm sorry, Alara," he said, his voice low. "I bring this on you." "No," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. "You don't. They were looking for an excuse. They found one. It's not your fault." Their connection, born of compassion and desperation, had deepened into something more profound. Ilara had grown to care for him, not just as a person in need of help, but as a man. His quiet strength, his connection to the land, his unwavering dignity had captured her heart. And Kana, a man who had been taught to hate and distrust the white man, found himself falling for a woman who had offered him a new kind of freedom. He found himself looking for her in the morning, a deep-seated need to see her face and hear her voice. That night, as the air grew cold, they sat by the fire, the silence a comfortable blanket between them. Kana looked at her, at the bruise on her arm, and a decision solidified in his mind. He had to earn his freedom, not just for himself, but for her. He had to find a way to break free from the chains, both physical and metaphorical. The next day, a small herd of wild mustangs was spotted near Ilara's land. A local rancher, Mr. Davies, offered a sizable reward for their capture. Kana, with his extensive knowledge of tracking and trapping, saw an opportunity. "I can do it," he told Ilara, his voice a rare mix of determination and hope. "The money, it could help. You could buy your place back in town." Ilara was hesitant. "It's dangerous, Kana." "I know this land," he insisted, "and I know horses." She looked at the conviction in his eyes and finally agreed. Over the next few days, Kana, with his cumbersome shackles and a single rope, began to track the wild herd. He moved with a quiet stealth that belied his chains, a testament to his ingrained hunting instincts. He studied the horses' movements, their watering holes, and their patterns. Ilara, meanwhile, worried. She spent her days watching the horizon, her heart a heavy weight in her chest. One morning, she woke to the sound of hooves. She ran outside to see Kana, exhausted and covered in dust, leading a young, beautiful chestnut mare. The horse was wild, but its eyes, wide with fear, were fixed on Kana with a strange kind of trust. He had not captured her with force, but with patience and understanding, an ancient knowledge of the bond between man and animal. Mr. Davies, the rancher, arrived to inspect the horse. He was skeptical, but the quality of the mare was undeniable. "You caught this with those things on your feet?" he asked, eyeing the shackles with a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. Kana simply nodded. The rancher paid Ilara the reward, the money a welcome balm on her troubled mind. The town, for a moment, was silenced by the accomplishment. The sight of a captured savage doing something they couldn't was a humbling reality. But the silence didn't last. Brody and Cooper, hearing of the bounty, came to the homestead. They were seething with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "He's still our prisoner, Ilara," Brody growled. "Any money he makes is ours." Ilara stood her ground. "He's no one's prisoner. I bought him. The money is ours. You have no claim here." Brody's face was a mask of fury. He took a step toward her, but Kana stepped in front of her, his body a solid, immovable barrier. "Stay back, white man," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no power here." The air crackled with tension. Cooper's hand went to his gun, but Brody, seeing the raw, unyielding fire in Kana's eyes, held him back. He knew a public brawl would not serve him. They retreated, but their final look was a promise of vengeance. As the winter winds began to howl, Kana and Ilara were forced to spend more time inside the small cabin. The cramped space, which once felt awkward, now felt like a cozy refuge. They would sit by the fire, reading and talking, their bond strengthening with every shared moment. Kana, his spirit slowly mending, learned to read the letters in her old books, his mind sharp and eager. Ilara, in turn, learned more about his people, their traditions, their stories. One cold night, a fierce blizzard raged outside. The wind rattled the windows, and the fire in the hearth was their only source of warmth. Ilara was mending a blanket, and Kana was carving a small horse out of a piece of wood. The silence was comfortable, filled with the crackle of the fire and the soft rasp of his knife. Ilara looked up from her work and met his gaze. The loneliness she had felt for years seemed to have vanished, replaced by a quiet, contented warmth. "Kana," she said, her voice a whisper, "what will you do when you are truly free?" He stopped carving, his gaze distant. "I will go back to my people, to the land, to my family." Her heart, which had just begun to hope, sank. She had known this, of course, but hearing it out loud was a cruel blow. The reality of their situation, the chasm of their different worlds, was a sharp, painful reminder of the impossibility of their love. He saw the pain in her eyes. "But I will not forget you, Ilara. Never." "It's not enough," she said, her voice trembling. "Not for me." He reached out and with a calloused thumb gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "I know," he said, his voice a low, painful acknowledgement of their broken promise. "I do not have a home, not anymore. I do not have a people. I am nothing but a man in chains." He was a prisoner of his past, and she, a prisoner of her own heart. The blizzard raged outside, a perfect mirror of the turmoil in their souls. They were caught between two worlds, two desires, his for his old life, hers for a new one with him. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal, but the town's animosity had festered over the winter. The whispers had grown into outright accusations. One day, a group of townsmen, led by Reverend Davies, came to Ilara's homestead. They were not threatening, but their purpose was clear. They wanted to reason with her. "Ilara," the Reverend said, his voice laced with unctuous concern, "we are worried about your soul. It's not natural, this living with a savage. It's an affront to God and to this community." Ilara stood in front of Kana, who was quietly watching from the porch. "He is a good man, Reverend. He has done nothing but good for me." "A good man?" A man in the crowd scoffed. "He's a murderer, an Apache." Kana stepped forward. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were hard. "I did not kill a man. Not like you mean it. I fought for my home, for my people, as you would fight for yours." The crowd's anger grew, but just as the situation threatened to boil over, a new figure rode up to the homestead. A U.S. Army scout, a tall, gaunt man with a tired face. He introduced himself as Captain Lewis. He had heard of the Apache man in Redemption Creek and wanted to verify his identity. Captain Lewis had been at the skirmish where Kana was captured. He looked at the man, a long, searching gaze. "You are Kana," he stated, a note of surprise in his voice. "The one they call the Ghost. You never take a life you don't need to." He turned to the crowd, his voice firm. "This man is a warrior, yes, but he is not a murderer. He fought for his land, his people. He saved my own life, in fact. During the skirmish, a rock slide was coming down on me. He could have left me to die, but he pushed me out of the way, even as he was being surrounded. He surrendered without a fight to save my men." A hush fell over the crowd. The accusations, the hatred, suddenly seemed hollow. The man they had called a savage and a murderer was a man of honor. The captain's words, a testimony from an unlikely source, began to shift the perception of Kana, at least for some. The captain's words had a profound effect. The townsfolk, now seeing Kana in a new light, began to leave Ilara alone. Brody and Cooper, their reputations tarnished by their lies and greed, were seen as the villains of the story. But the biggest change was in the relationship between Ilara and Kana. The chains on his feet were a constant reminder of his captivity, but the bonds between them were forged in respect and love. One night, Ilara brought a hacksaw to Kana, her hands trembling. "I can't bear it anymore," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at his chained ankles. "I can't bear to see you like this." He looked at the hacksaw, then at her. "It's not safe," he said. "If they see—" "I don't care," she insisted. "I don't care what they think. You are a man, Kana, not a prisoner." With a heavy heart, he agreed. Over the next several days, while the town was quiet and no one was around, they worked to saw through the chains. It was a long, arduous process, a slow, painful metaphor for their journey to freedom. The metal was thick, the work painstaking. They took turns, their movements slow and deliberate, the rasping sound a quiet song of hope. Finally, with a final grinding snap, the last link broke. Kana stood up, his ankles raw and scarred, but free. He moved with an unburdened grace, a fluidity he had not felt in years. He looked at Ilara, a profound gratitude in his eyes. He was free, but the cost was high. He had to leave her. "I have to go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have to go back to my people." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had known this was coming, but the reality was a brutal blow. "I know." He took a step toward her, his face etched with pain. He had found a home with her, a peace he had not known in years, but his heart, his very soul, was tied to the land of his ancestors. He had to go back. The night before Kana was to leave, they sat by the fire, two souls facing an impossible goodbye. The moon, a silver crescent in the night sky, cast a soft glow on their faces. "I'll never forget you, Ilara," he said, his voice a promise. "You gave me a life. You gave me hope. And you gave me a reason to live," she said, her voice a whisper. "You gave me back my heart." He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and firm. The scars on her hands from hard work met the scars on his from the chains. They were a testament to their shared struggles, their shared lives. "There are two roads for me," he said. "One goes to the past, and one to a future I do not know." She looked at him, her eyes filled with love and a quiet understanding. "Then take the one that leads to the future," she said. "Go, find your people. Be happy. I want that for you." He was a warrior, a man of pride and strength, but the tears that gathered in his eyes were a testament to the depth of his feelings. He leaned in and, with a gentle touch, kissed her. It was a kiss of farewell, of gratitude, of love that had no future. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Kana was gone. He left a small, beautifully carved wooden horse on her nightstand, a silent, heartfelt goodbye. Ilara stood on her porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains, a new day dawning, and felt a profound, bittersweet sense of loss. She had saved a man, and in doing so had lost a part of herself. Months passed. The homestead, which once felt so full, now felt achingly empty. Ilara went about her daily tasks, but her heart was heavy. She would often look at the small wooden horse Kana had left behind, a tangible reminder of the man who had changed her life. One late spring afternoon she was working in her garden, the air filled with the sweet scent of new blossoms. A rider approached her homestead. Her heart leaped to her throat, a wild, impossible hope fluttering in her chest. It was Kana. He dismounted, his face weary but his eyes alight with a quiet joy. He had found his people, but he had also found a new path. He had seen the prejudice, the conflict, the pain, but he had also seen a way forward. "I came back for you, Ilara," he said, his voice a deep, resonant hum. "My people, They welcomed me. But they also taught me something new. They taught me that our future is not just with the past. It is with a new beginning. He held out his hand to her. I want to build a life with you, here, with my people, and with yours. I want to build a bridge between our worlds. Alara looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. She saw not a man in chains, not a symbol of a defeated people, but a man who had found his purpose, his future, in her. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The scars on her hands met the scars on his ankles, a testament to their shared history, their shared pain, and their shared hope. I'm not a widow anymore, she whispered. I am a woman with a future. He smiled, a true, brilliant smile that lit up his face. And I am a man who has found his home. Together, they walked toward the cabin, their hands clasped, a symbol of a new kind of love, a new kind of future, forged not in the fire of hatred and prejudice, but in the quiet, compassionate soil of the American West.